The biggest lie sold to you in ecom is that as you spend more on marketing, you'll become more profitable because you will democratize the amount of operating expenses on the P&L. I've seen this play out a lot of times now. Sometimes it's true, but majority of times it doesn't actually play out like you think. And it's because operating expenses end up scaling with revenue in most ecom businesses. We're going to break down exactly why this is the case here. But firstly, I want to explain this concept, as we actually have videos from years ago that run through this exact concept. And I have seen this concept bring businesses into profitability. So it's not to say this is wrong. It's not to say this is bad, but it's risky. And I'll explain why. The idea here is that as you spend more on marketing, your operating expenses as a percentage will decline, and therefore you will be able to make more profit. You are effectively scaling your way out to losses. Let's actually give an example. So if we move through here, let's say we have this business. They're doing $100,000 in a month in revenue. Their cost of delivery is $40K, so they're spending 40% of their revenue on cost of goods, shipping and fulfillment, etc. They're spending $25K on marketing, so 25% allocation on MER, and then they have $25K in operating expenses. Okay, great. What that leaves them with is $10K at the end of the day each month, which has them on 10% net. Now, the advice most of the time here would be that you should go and crank up marketing, because the more you can spend on marketing, the more revenue you will make, and as long as operating expenses don't go up, you'll make a lot more money. So what does that end up looking like? Well, let's say that they take this advice. They go from 25K spend and they jump it to 40. Now, there's going to be diminishing returns here. They're not going to get an exact 50%. Sorry, they're not going to get an exact, about an 80% increase in returns. It's going to be a little bit less. So their revenue doesn't jump by 80%, it jumps by 50. Great. Their cost of delivery goes up, because now they have to deliver and fulfill on more orders. But their operating expenses, in this theoretical situation, let's say they stay stable. They don't increase operating expenses. Well, what then ends up happening? They now make 25K profit, and they're at 16% EBITDA. And so not only are they in a better profit position from a dollar perspective, but they're in a better percentage, a relative profitability position as well. So this seems like a no-brainer for any business doing 100K a month revenue, right? You should just spend more as long as it's profitable and drives top line, and you will effectively scale yourself into profitability. The issue is that there's a core assumption built into this entire model and this thesis, which is that operating expenses will remain stable. Now, the one thing that I have learned after working with over 300 e-commerce brands, particularly a lot of small ones, is that founders do not keep operating expenses stable in an e-commerce business. They always go up, and they go up as a percentage of revenue. Now, half of this is psychological. People believe that they can allocate capital effectively within a business despite them having no proven track record to do so. And so they go and hire a bunch of agencies that aren't good. They go and spend a bunch of money on content that isn't good. They go and hire people that aren't good because they've never interviewed and hired people before. And so they end up really bloating out these operating expenses because they're reinvesting in the business, but they're not doing it well. Okay, but what if you've taken that advice? You go, okay, I'm not an effective capital allocator when I'm owning a business of this size, and so I'm going to keep it lean for now, and I just want to be as profitable as possible. Okay, cool. So let's break down what operating expenses actually are in an e-com biz, because this obviously changes depending on the business model quite a lot. So if we're looking at e-com and we're looking at operating expenses, I've always said that there's really 4 core buckets of OPEX. Number 1 is people. Number 2 is warehousing. Now, sometimes this is $0 because people just use a 3PL and there's no need for any warehousing or any office space if they stay remote. And so this can be 0, but this is generally the second bucket. The third bucket is software. And then the fourth bucket, which you could just group into number 1, but I'm going to keep it separate because it kind of is different, is agencies. Now, agencies is also going to encapture most content production cost. Okay, so if you're going to outsource your content creation, it's likely going to drop here. There's obviously a fifth bucket, which is like miscellaneous. There's going to be if you look at someone's 0 P&L, like it's not just going to be this stuff. There's going to be a bunch of other random stuff. They're going to put some car payments on the business. They're going to put some random like staff, amenities, and things like that. But this is really the 4 big buckets that comprise operating expenses. Now, as we look at a business scaling, particularly like we can take this instance, but we can take really any example where a business has gone from A position in revenue to B position in revenue. What is required here in terms of OPEX? Well, generally, as you grow, you need to do a lot more stuff in the business, okay? And there generally becomes a constraint that exists within the business that can only be solved by you delegating existing work and then working on the constraint, or you hiring someone that can solve the constraint for you. So regardless of what it is, generally what will have to happen here is that you will have to hire people. Now, you might not need to necessarily hire someone when you go from 100 to 150, but when you go from 100 to, let's say, 250, you probably do. Now, at a bare minimum, you at least need to hire an agency, okay? Because 100K revenue, that's fine, and you can get away with that probably doing everything in-house. But once you're doing 250, there's stuff that you're going to need to outsource. And so you're definitely going to have to bring an agency on at this point to do something. Like you can be anti-paid media agencies, that's fine, but you'll need a content agency. Or maybe maybe you're in a really good niche for SEO. Maybe you don't have time to do any emails. You don't even know how to use Klaviyo, so you hire an email agency. Like you're going to need someone to do something so that you can continue to grow the business. And so because of that, agency costs go up. All right, well, what about warehousing and office? Well, a 100K business is probably going to be remote, probably doesn't have a warehouse. 250, most people jump into a warehouse pretty quick at that revenue level. At least that's a reality that I've seen. People often don't go down the 3PL route, and they, for whatever reason, want something tangible. They want to own their own fulfillment. Not something I would personally do, but it's what they want to do. And so because of that, warehousing and office space normally appears on the P&L. Okay, and then what about software? Well, software we can keep contained, right? Like we just have a couple Google profiles, maybe we have some Canva, some Adobe Premiere, and then we have our ERP, and then maybe we have a profit software, and then we have maybe Triple Whale, and all these things start to begin to stack. There's 2 commonalities here. Number 1, software. I hate software because software is normally always billed as a percentage of whatever your revenue is or your throughput is of that software, or it's billed on a X user level. So if you have 10 users, you'll be billed 10X more than if you have 1 user. And so as your people go up, your software goes up. As your revenue goes up, your software goes up. As your orders go up, your software goes up. And so your software as a percentage on the P&L, I've almost never seen this decline in a business. Unless we're talking about like a $1,000 a month revenue business going to 100, obviously it's going to decline. But this often either stays stable or goes up. And often, at least from 100K a month to, I would say, $1 million a month, your software expenses are actually going to increase as a percentage on the P&L because you have to introduce ERP, you have to introduce a customer database management software, you have to introduce an CRM if you're going to have some kind of wholesale arm to the business or some kind of B2B component. And so software is generally going to go up. And so what actually ends up happening, at least when you zoom out on large revenue step changes, is that operating expenses pretty much remains the same as a percentage on the P&L as you continue to scale. Sometimes it will even increase. Now, I have seen businesses where this isn't the case. And obviously you can be super stringent, you can run your business super lean, as long as you're super skilled and you don't need to bring in talent that's going to unlock the bottlenecks that exist within the business, then you can have operating expenses decline as a percentage on the P&L. But for most people, it isn't the case. And where you end up seeing very specific examples that push this narrative is on very small revenue jumps like this. This scenario is actually pretty realistic. Going from 100K a month business to 150K a month, it's in the big picture, it's like almost nothing of a change. Okay, the difference here, it's such a small nominal dollar amount on a monthly level and on a yearly level. They're growing a business from 100K to 150K. It just isn't really that massive of a step change. And so because of that, do you need a bunch of new talent and hires in the business to operate a 150K business versus 100K? No, like this doesn't really require someone to join the team. Does this require some kind of new software? No, probably not. Does this require you to go into warehousing in an office space? No, probably not. Does this require you to go and hire an agency? Could, but you probably don't need to. Like, you can hold off, you can be strict. And so therefore, this situation actually very much so is doable. And if you're this brand right here, you should do this. However, just note that when you try to do this again and again and again, it won't scale. And so when you then go, okay, let's double spend again and let's take it to 80. Okay, great. Now, what does that take revenue to? Well, marketing is going to continue to decline in terms of efficiency, particularly if you scale rapidly. If you scale over very long time horizons with thoughtful, continuous feedback in the paid media loop, it doesn't have to. In fact, efficiency could even increase. But let's say we're doing this rapidly and we're continuing to make this trade to become more profitable by spending more. Well, this right here, this spend for this revenue was a 3.75x return. Let's say it erodes to a 3.5 return. Well, that takes revenue to 280, takes cost of delivery to 140. And now, what is operating expenses? So the reality here in this kind of jump of revenue level is your operating expenses absolutely will change. Particularly, so operating expenses didn't even change here. It remained stable. So really what we're looking at is, have operating expenses changed within a 280K business versus a 180K a month business? Resoundingly yes. Unless there's like 3 founders in this business working 100 hours a week, which I've actually seen before. So there is always exceptions to the rule. For most people, operating expenses are going to go through the roof. And so what is this actually tangibly going to look like? Well, from 100K to 280, you're probably looking at 2 hires here. Now, this is assuming that you're not doing your own warehousing and you don't need actual pick and pack staff. Most people will make the mistake. You can look at it as a mistake or not a mistake. It's really up to you and your business. But most people will make the mistake of going and then entering into warehousing, office, and actually hiring all of this required. So let's say that this gets introduced, and let's say including all costs, including shipping, fulfillment, etc., all the staff, maybe this is looking at something like 20K per month. Software is going to increase. It's probably going to be, at this stage of the business, it's probably going to be maybe 7% of total revenue. And then agencies, this kind of size business will typically have between 2 to 3 agencies at this point. There'll be a web dev agency, so there'll be a whole new web build for sure during this kind of scale. There will be generally some kind of paid media or growth agency, and then there'll be something else that'll sit in there. That might be email, that might be SEO, that might be content, it might be influencers, it might be affiliates, right? There's going to be something else in there, definitely, that's going to make this 3 agencies. And so then we can start to walk through, what does this OPEX actually look like? This software is going to be sitting, if it's at 7%, we're looking at about 20K here. We're looking at about 20K here. On people, let's just make the math super easy and call it 20K, obviously. Could be much less, could be much more, depending on what kind of seniority and hires these are. And then agencies, let's say you're not going with premium agencies and you're going with something cheap solutions. Let's call it 6K average agency cost. So maybe we're looking at 18K here. Great. So now we have the original 25 base. We're going to add in 20, and I've got my calculator here. We're going to add in another 20, and then another 20, and then 18. And so what do we have? Our operating expenses here have come to 108K. So let's go and pop this in. Now let's go down. So we've got 280 minus 104 minus 80 minus 108, and we are officially at negative $12,000 in profit. Okay, so we probably bloated too quickly. So let's assume you don't go into warehousing, and let's assume you only hire 1 person. Okay, that's then going to save us 30K, which is going to take you back to 18K profit. Great. So what you would have noticed is profit has declined. Profit has declined going from 150K a month to 280K a month. And this is because operating expenses has expanded from 25K to 78K. This OPEX expansion is pretty normal. Okay, you're going to have some more softwares here. You're going to bring on a couple agencies for sure, and you're probably going to hire one person. And then you can start mix and matching this. So maybe you don't bring on 3 agencies. Maybe you think that's ridiculous. 6K agencies, why would we do that? Maybe you only bring on 1. Okay, cool. But then you're probably going to hire 2 people, right? You're probably not going to just have 1 person with 1 agency, because this is a lot of work being done here. And so to generate growth in the business, you probably need 2 people. So instead you make 2 hires. Maybe it's an admin hire and then it's a marketing manager kind of hire. Okay, you're not going to do warehousing and office, but software. This seems a little bit high. Okay, maybe you cut software down to 15K or 10K in expenses. Sure, you're still less profitable than you were back in 150. And so the reality is this operating expense expansion is pretty normal. Does it have to be this aggressive? No. Could you be leaner? Yes. But the reality is that if you just try to scale your way to profitability, but you're continuing to erode efficiency in marketing, which is what's happened here. The main reason why this dip has occurred is because your marketing efficiency declined and your operating expenses obviously expanded. So the question then, how do you have marketing expenses decline as a percentage as you scale? So where you might have started back here at a 25% MER, how do you then by this stage get that down to 20%? Or how do you get it down to 15%? Because it's these types of businesses that actually unlock margin as they achieve scale, because they truly do democratize operating expenses as a percentage, and they do democratize MER as a percentage as well. The thing that these businesses have in common, the businesses that are able to decline MER, is really 2 main buckets. Now, there's other scenarios, but these are the 2 main buckets that I see. Number 1 is returning customer revenue. So at the start, they have very little returning customer revenue because they don't have any customers. And so they go and acquire a bunch of customers through paid marketing, or whatever their acquisition channel is. And then from that, these people start to return, and they buy a second time and they buy a third time, and they start to have this growth in returning customer revenue as a pie of total rev. And when that happens, they're still spending the same amount to acquire customers, but they've got all of this revenue that sits on top, that's all this RC revenue that's super profitable. But so what ends up happening here is you might be still spending the same amount on acquiring customers, but your MER starts to decline because returning customer revenue props up your revenue numbers. And so this is number 1, people to become more profitable as they continue to exist, because they have a bunch of RC revenue that makes MER improve. And in this case, just side note, you then start wanting to index paid media against acquisition MER so that you can look at spend against new customer revenue and you're not including returning customer revenue. A big mistake people make here is they just continue to use MER to allocate media spend, and they just end up overspending. And they just end up never expanding their margin. Number 2 position where people end up becoming more profitable is that they find efficient channels that lay outside of paid media. As a primarily paid media agency, this seems like something I shouldn't say, but the reality is that if you just try to grow a business off paid ads and that is it, the one reality of paid media performance is that as you increase spend, diminishing returns occur. That isn't necessarily the case when you start to introduce novel new channels that might be incredibly efficient for your particular business. An example of that is you might find, and this is a relatively niche example, but I think it's a good one to demonstrate the point, you might find co-branding. So finding other businesses that are tangential to yours and then doing some kind of co-branding effort with them is an incredible revenue driver that is super, super efficient. Doesn't cost you a lot. You just spin up a slightly new product with maybe a new color variant. You're able to market to their consumers. They can maybe market to your consumers through some kind of back and forth deal. And because of that, you're able to drive an extra 1, 2, 3 million a year just through co-branding efforts. And because of that, this requires little paid media expense to it because you already have the pre-existing audience to serve the media to through direct communication channels, and therefore you become much more efficient as a business. Now, examples of where I have seen this happen, I'll give once again a weird side example, so I'm just not saying obvious stuff that people know. Launching into retail. So when you have direct-to-consumer online and then you start launching retail stores, the retail stores prop up the online store because, well, there's 10, 20 reasons why. I could make a video on it in itself. But this ends up being a good sales engine for the online store, and then vice versa. And so you end up with generally a bit of a lift in efficiency on the online store P&L. So I hope this was helpful in breaking down why this core premise, although correct in specific instances, does not scale infinitely. And so you have to be very careful if you're going to make this play, if you're going to go and increase marketing spend to drop operating expenses as a percentage to improve net profit. Note that you just can't make this play forever. It's a play that you can run once or twice, but then you ultimately need to get marketing expenses in check. The big dilemma, the big mistake that almost every e-com founder makes during this period is they just ramp OPEX way too fast. Be diligent with where you're allocating your operating expenses. The reality, the harsh reality, is that your hiring is going to be bad. Your ability to be efficient across warehousing is going to be bad. Your ability to control software expenses and choose the right software is going to be bad. And your ability to effectively vet agencies and choose the right agency at the point in which that is the constraint on the business, you're going to be bad at it. And so because of that, when you just end up over-allocating towards OPEX, you put the business in a very risky position, and all of this isn't really driving you the growth needed to pay for it. So just be careful when you're ramping up operating expenses. Focus on free cash flow over arbitrary revenue maximization, and don't fall for the trap that operating expenses just infinitely decline as a percentage on the P&L and will magically open up profit margin for you at some point in the future. It isn't real.